You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. And at the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with Alan Levy, the author of the book on Walter Alston. But I have to start with college basketball, specifically Baylor beating Oklahoma State. Yesterday, I said that Baylor needed to contain Cade Cunningham if they were going to have any shot of winning. Well, they didn't do that. Cunningham went off. He had 24 points. Oklahoma State looked really good offensively yesterday. They played well enough to win when you just look at what they did with the ball in their hands. The thing is, though, and this is the Achilles heel for the Cowboys, they let Baylor drop 81 on them. They really don't have a good defense. It's something that Michael Boynton has done a really bad job of. Installing a defense that's capable of slowing down the best teams in the nation. You're not going to win if you let Jared Butler go off for 22 points. You're not going to win if you let Masio Teague and Matthew Mayer both drop 19. You're not going to win if Davion Mitchell scores 12. Baylor just couldn't miss. I thought they had a great offensive game plan. I thought it took advantage of the Cowboys perfectly. The Bears played an almost flawless game. I'm sure that Scott Drew had a really easy time falling asleep last night. He had to be really happy with his team. They forced 18 turnovers, scored 26 points off those turnovers. Make no mistake about it, all throughout this game, the Bears were the better team. I mean, I picked Baylor to win, don't get me wrong. But I did expect Oklahoma State to put up more of a fight. I mean, I like Oklahoma State. You know I love Cade Cunningham. The thing is, though, they just have games that make you shake your head. They lost to TCU in early February. TCU is bad this year. They blew a 19-point lead to WVU in early January. That was their third loss in 4 games. They have impressive wins. There's no question. Beating Oklahoma Saturday and Monday was really impressive. Beating Texas Tech in overtime was impressive. But this is a really streaky Cowboys team. Do they have what it takes to go on a big run in March? The answer is yes. Is it also possible that they allow an inferior team to beat them? Or not put their foot on the throat of their opponent when they've gotten down 19? Yeah, that's very possible. It's going to be tough for anyone to confidently pick Oklahoma State to go on a big run this month. Moving on now to Texas, Oklahoma. And this was a really surprising game. Not because I picked Oklahoma to win and they didn't, but because the best player on the floor was Jericho Sims. I mean, Sims is a good player, don't get me wrong, but he's the sixth guy you think of when you think of this Longhorns team. You think of the Joneses, you think of Ramey, you think of Coleman, you think of Brown. You don't think of Jericho Sims. But Sims went off. He had 16 points and 12 rebounds. He was contesting every shot on the interior. Make no mistake about it. He was the best player for either team yesterday. Another unsung hero who stepped up? Jace Fabrice. The guy had 11 points off the bench. He helped the Longhorns compensate for Kai Jones's no-show. And Sims helped them compensate for Coleman's no-show. This win bodes really well for Texas. If they're able to compensate for their big guns not playing well, they're unstoppable. I didn't think Sims would be able to have that type of a game against a team like the Sooners. A team as good as them. And Jace Fabrice, forget about it. He was an afterthought to me. If Texas can really flesh out their depth and go more than 6 deep, and even then, really only have 4 guys who you need to worry about scoring double digits, they're going to be incredibly tough to beat in the big dance. I mean, this was an incredibly close game. Texas led for the vast majority of it, but Oklahoma kept making them work. And never got to the point where you could confidently say, you know what, I'm going to turn this game off because I know Texas is going to win. No, Oklahoma kept fighting. Give the Sooners credit. The thing is, though, they were about as inefficient from the field as they've been all year. They shot just 37% from the field, 28% from beyond the arc. I mean, I'll read you some stat lines. Umoja Gibson, 1 for 5 from beyond the arc. Elijah Harkless, 3 for 11 from the field, 0 for 3 from beyond the arc. Austin Reeves, the guy who, going into this game, I thought was the best player on either side. 4 for 12 from the field, 2 for 6 from beyond the arc. That's not going to work. And this isn't a great defensive Texas team. It's not bad defensively, but this isn't one of Shaka Smart's old Havoc VCU teams. There was no excuse for that performance yesterday. Oklahoma should have won. It was in Norman. I thought they had the talent necessary to win. They just didn't show up offensively. You can't win if you can't score consistently. It's just that simple. Alright, now it's time to preview this weekend's 2 games that feature 2 ranked teams. And I'll start with Illinois taking on OSU. The big thing that you need to know about this game is that Ayo Dosunmu is questionable with a nasal fracture. Without him, the Illini have no chance. Kofi Coburn's really good, but he's a Robin. He's not a Batman. And Trent Frazier is Alfred. They've got some other solid players like Andre Curbelo and Adam Miller, but I'm not even going to bother to give them Batman parallels. If Dosunmu doesn't play, the Illini have no shot of winning. I mean, if Dosunmu was 100%, I'd pick the Illini. I do think they're a better team than the Buckeyes when they're at 100%. But I can't do that here. E.J. Liddell and Dwayne Washington are now the dynamic duo that you need to watch out for. And Justice Suing is a good tertiary piece. The one thing that bodes well for the Illini in this game is that you can make the argument that Kofi Coburn is the best player on either side. You can make the argument that he's better than Liddell, Washington, and Suing. And yeah, he's probably going to gather all the loose boards. OSU doesn't have anyone who comes close to him in terms of height and weight. I don't think Illinois is going to get their doors blown off. But I don't see how they win this game. Give me OSU. Moving on now to Wisconsin, Iowa. A very, very interesting game. The great Wisconsin defense going up against the great Iowa offense. Can they find a way to slow down guys like Garza, Wieskamp, Bohannon, and Frederick? If anyone can, it's the Badgers. They only give up 63.5 points per game. That's the 34th best mark in the nation. I mean, I'll say this, a guy like Nate Roovers can make Garza's life pretty difficult. A guy like Demetric Trice or Brad Davison could make Joe Wieskamp's life really difficult. This game is going to come down to the other matchup. Because Iowa's not going to be able to go off for 85 points in this game. And the Badgers aren't going to be able to hold Iowa to 63 points. It's going to come down to the Wisconsin offense going up against the Hawkeyes defense. And I'll tell you a guy who really needs to step up for the Hawkeyes. Keegan Murray. Murray is probably their best overall defender. He's a freshman, which makes that all the more impressive. He's the only Hawkeye to average at least 1 steal and 1 block per game this year. I'd expect to see him on the floor a lot on Sunday. The other question, how much can Demetric Trice go off? How much can Micah Potter go off? They're solid scorers, but they're not great. They're not at the Garza level or the Wieskamp level. Look, it wouldn't stun me at all if Wisconsin won this game. They match up incredibly well with Iowa. What's the one thing that can stop a great offense? A great defense. But I just think Iowa's going to be a little too much for him. Garza can still get his. Wieskamp can still get his. I think Keegan Murray's going to have a big impact. I'll say this, though. On February 25th, I was really unimpressed with Fran McCaffrey's game plan. Michigan took advantage of that and utterly destroyed Iowa. But McCaffrey is a really good coach. I don't think he's going to be fooled again. How about them Hawks? Alright, now I'll give you some NHL Valk talk. And the only thing to talk about is the Flames firing Jeff Ward and replacing him with Daryl Suter. It's kind of funny, I was talking about Daryl Suter the other day with someone. It's like Beetlejuice, we said his name too many times. Now he's here. Look, there's no question that the Flames were underachieving this year. They made some huge moves in free agency, bringing in Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom from their rivals, the Canucks. I remember praising them during my NHL offseason recap. At this very moment, they're 11-11-2. They're 2 points behind the Habs for that final playoff spot in the North Division. And when you have the opportunity to bring in Daryl Suter, one of the best coaches in your franchise's history, a 2-time Stanley Cup winner, a guy who got Jarome Iginla as close to winning a Stanley Cup as he's ever gotten, you do it. I mean, people forget how epic the 2004 Stanley Cup Finals was. It went 7 games. The final 4 games of the series were all 1-goal games. 2 of them went into overtime. Daryl Suter is a great coach and should be in the Hall of Fame. When you can get that guy, get him. I understand that. It's unfortunate for Ward. I don't think he's a bad coach. Last year, he took over the Flames when they were in a really tough spot. Bill Peters had resigned. The team was 12-12-4. Ward rallied the troops. They went 24-15-3 under him. They beat the Jets in the qualifying round pretty convincingly. And then they lost to the Stars in 6 games. Ward had less than a full season to show what he could do as Flames head coach. That's a bad job by the Flames in not giving him even a full season. I mean, I understand if you can get Daryl Suter, get him. But I didn't think Ward was doing a bad job. Okay, Matthew Tkachuk went through a little bit of a slump once upon a time. He's back now, isn't he? Oh my God, Sam Bennett isn't producing. Sam Bennett stinks. Sam Bennett's a bust. Yesterday, the Flames destroyed the Senators 7-3. You're going to fire the coach after his team just scored 7 goals in a game. I understand that if you can get Darryl Suter, get him. I don't begrudge you for that. I really don't. I just think they did Jeff Ward dirty. And I think he'll get a second chance somewhere. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. And I'll start with a couple offensive linemen that supposedly are on the trading block, according to Jason LaCanfora of CBS Sports. Those two offensive linemen are Andrew Norwell and Kevin Zeitler. I'll attack Norwell first. Trading him makes absolutely no sense. Norwell is still a really good left guard in this league. Last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he had a 67.9 overall grade. The guy's a Jaguar. To put together good seasons for the Jaguars is impressive. He's been a Jaguar for 3 seasons. He's never had a grade under 65. Is he as great now as he was with the Panthers? The answer is no, but he's still really good. You do not move on from Andrew Norwell. There is no good reason to move on from him. I don't care how great Trevor Lawrence is. If the guy's on his back half the time, it's irrelevant. The Jaguars, at this very moment, lead the NFL in cap space with over $85 million. There is literally no good reason to move on from Andrew Norwell. If he is truly available, every team in the NFL should be in on him. I mean, if you have a great left guard already, fine. You don't need Norwell. But even if you could stand just to upgrade that position a little bit, do it. That's how great Norwell is. And his ceiling is playing at an all-pro level. That's how great Norwell is. As for Kevin Zeitler, I understand wanting to move on from him. The Giants at this moment have just a little bit over $6 million in cap room. That's really nothing. Trading Zeitler would save the Giants $12 million. They basically triple their cap space. I wouldn't give him away because Zeitler is a really good right guard. Last year he had a 65.9 overall grade. Granted, that is the worst mark of his career by a pretty sizable margin. Over 7 points to be specific. But Zeitler's still solid. I understand that he's not getting any younger. He's going to turn 31 on Monday. Happy early birthday. But I wouldn't give Zeitler away. If you could get a 4th round pick for him, okay. I can live with that. Anything less? No, I'll try to keep him around. Speaking of NFC East offensive linemen, the Eagles are going to bring back Jason Kelce. Next year, he's guaranteed $9 million. And he can even get $3 million more. The Eagles absolutely had to keep Kelce around. The reality is that is a fractured locker room. You know that the players were upset when Jalen Hurts was pulled for Nate Sudfeld. Then the Super Bowl winning coach gets fired. The quarterback gets traded. You've got a guy in Nick Sirianni who made probably the worst first impression he possibly could in the city of brotherly love. You've got to keep Kelsey around. One of the best centers in the game, 69.6 overall grade last year. I mean, let me tell you, if you wanted to make the argument that Jason Kelsey's a future Hall of Famer, I'd listen to you. 4-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. Obviously, he has a Super Bowl ring. The guy plays every snap. You had to keep Kelsey around. Good job by the Eagles. First time I've been able to say that in a while. Alright, here's my interview with Alan Levy. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Alan Levy, the author of Walter Alston, The Rise of a Manager from the Minors to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Alan, how are you?
Very well, sir. Looking forward to a new baseball season.
Yes, so am I. The Yankees seem to have a good... I'm a Yankees fan. The Yankees seem to have a good shot this year. And again, I said that last year. So, what can you tell us about the one MLB game in which Alston played?
Alston was a reasonably promising minor leaguer. He had come out of Miami University of Ohio and was signed by the Cardinals organization. He played a season in Mississippi, low-level minors, batted over 300, got promoted to another level of the minors in Huntington, West Virginia, again batted over 300, and led the league in home runs. So at the end of the 36th season, for the last 3 weeks, as is often the case back then, the most promising young players got to come up to the big time just for the end of season. So he got to play for 3 weeks, or at least be on the team for 3 weeks in St. Louis. He got to play with Frankie Frisch, Dizzy Dean, Leo DeRocher, and it was just like the old movie Field of Dreams. Remember when Burt Lancaster gives the reminiscence? It was the last day of the season. I hadn't seen any action. That's exactly what happened to Alston. He didn't get in any games because the Cardinals actually were playing for keeps because the Giants in 36 and 37 had the pennant wrapped up. But at this point, the Cardinals, the Cubs, were vying for second place, and that meant money. In the old days, the first 4 teams of the 8 in the National and American League got a cut of the World Series receipts. That's where the term came from, in money, finish in the money. And so that who came in second place versus third place, that meant money to everybody on the team. And so Frankie Frisch, the Cardinals manager, kept the starters going because he wanted to come in second. And so it wasn't until the last game of the season, they were playing the Cubs, and the winner, if the Cubs won, then they would be a flat-footed tie with St. Louis, and there would be a different share of the World Series money. So the Cardinals wanted to win. And the Cardinals' regular first baseman, Johnny Mize, argued a little too strongly with the umpire on a call, and he was tossed out of the game. And so because of that, with the other first baseman having already been used as a pinch hitter, Frankie Frisch inserted Walter Alston into the game last day of the season. Committed one error as first baseman. Dizzy Dean yelled at him in front of everybody. And he got one at bat. So it was a little different than Burt Lancaster. Remember who in the movie he said, I wish I'd gotten up to bat just once. Alston did just once, and he struck out.
His best Moonlight Graham impression.
That was it.
Oh, man. And Lon Warnicki was the one who struck him out. Lon Warnicki was a good pitcher.
Very good pitcher.
So Alston bounced around in the minors. Like you said, that was his only time in the majors. And he knew that if he had a future in baseball, it was as a manager. And he ended up managing in the American Association. Not too many people know this story that I'm going to ask you. I know you know it.
Can you lay out how Alston helped to desegregate
Sure.
the American Association?
Well, there's a couple of steps. First off, Alston, when he was with the Cardinal organization, he was sort of the protege, or if you will, or Branch Rickey, who was the president of the whole association. Rickey switched to the Dodgers during World War II. Alston still was with the Cardinals, but the Cardinals dropped him during the war, and it looked like his foray in baseball was over. He was going to return to high school teaching. But in 44, Rickey picked him up to manage one of his minor league clubs, which he did capably in 44 and 45. That was in Trenton, New Jersey. The following season was the year that Rickey signed, of course, famously signed Jackie Robinson to play with first Montreal for a year and subsequently with Brooklyn. That same year, Mr. Rickey also hired several other African-American players. Two of them turned out to be Roy Campanella and Don Newcomb. He assigned to Nashua, New Hampshire. And Alston was assigned to manage that club. Alston managed Nashua to a league championship. The following year, Rickey sent him to Colorado. He managed a team in Pueblo to a Western League championship. And then he was sent to St. Paul to manage the Saints in the American Association. And that's where Rickey sent him African-American players in his Dodger system. And Alston seamlessly was able to work various players in, including Campanella, whom he was reunited with, and was able to take St. Paul from its previous season in 7th place to a finish in 2nd place, and then won the playoffs and won the league championship.
And he had no qualms about playing African-American players, right?
None whatsoever. Indeed, he would be out front of it because he, like Rickey demanded, or isn't too strong a word, but as Rickey wanted of Jack Robinson when he came up with Brooklyn, Alston wanted Campanella and Newcomb to play it straight, just be the ball players, ignore the crowds. But he knew it was going to be difficult. And in tiny towns like Nashua, New Hampshire, where the feeling of the ballpark was much more intimate, the sense of a fan being in your face with insults involved much more close proximity. So Alston several times just simply got right in between people and his players to protect them. And indeed, if needed be, he was ready with his fists. He had to be.
Did he ever get into a fight with a fan?
He never got into a fight with a fan. There was one fan that he confronted in St. Paul in Minnesota, where he met him. He'd been yelling at him during the game, and he met the fan on the street, and he just said, "Nobody's around right now. You want to make something of all the things you were yelling at me?" And the guy walked away. Never heard from him again.
That's a good job by Alston. I like that. I didn't know that story.
He was a tough guy. I mean, Fred Hutchinson, the old manager of the Cincinnati Reds, said 3 things never to challenge Alston on. One is anything with a pool cue. He could run 100 balls in a game of straight pool. He several times played with Willie Mosconi. Never beat him, of course. And also
Paul Newman when you need him.
Yeah. And then secondly, you never challenge him to anything with a rifle. He was a top-notch skeet shooter and a great hunter. And the third thing, when he was young, you never challenged him into anything with his fists. He was a big, strong farm boy. Nice guy. But if he was to be challenged, he would not back away.
So how did the Dodgers end up deciding that Alston was the right guy to take over for Chuck Dressen and be reunited with Campy and Newcomb?
In a sense, 2 things at once. Alston, again, he was successful at St. Paul. And after 2 seasons there, Mr. Rickey switched him to the top farm club, which was Montreal, where 4 straight seasons had them in first place every time. And so virtually every player in the Dodger system, except for actually Robinson and Pee Wee Reese, had at one point or another played with Alston on the way up. So he was known. The Dodgers, of course, they'd won several pennants at that point under Dressen, 52 and 53. And before then, they'd won pennants in 41, 47, 49, and then on top of 52 and 53, that was 5 pennants. And every time they won the pennant, they lost the World Series. And not only did they lose the World Series, but they lost it. Excuse me, you just told me a minute ago whom you were a fan of. But the Brooklyn Dodgers lost every one of those World Series to the blank Yankees. As Sid Caesar put it very nicely, he said, it wasn't that we were the second best team in baseball. That was okay. It was that we were the second best team in New York. That's what riled him. And so Dressen, switching the story, Alston was making good in Montreal for sure. Dressen, who certainly did a capable job. He won 2 pennants in a row, for goodness sakes. You can't argue with that. But he
was a really good manager.
He's a very good manager. But he asked O'Malley within a couple of weeks after the loss to the Yankees in the World Series. He asked Mr. O'Malley for a multi-year contract.
Okay.
O'Malley only liked 1-year contracts. And as Alston reflected, Mr. O'Malley was a reasonable man, but he didn't like being pushed around. Dressen not only pushed this idea of a multi-year contract, his wife actually wrote O'Malley a letter basically saying, how dare you be ungrateful to my husband, et cetera, et cetera. You didn't push O'Malley. And within about 2 weeks of being asked for a multi-year contract, Mr. O'Malley fired Dressen. And then when another couple of weeks went by with loads and loads of people, reporters, Brooklynites all over the place in their barbershops and in their bars and restaurants, all asking the same question: who's going to succeed Dressen? Who's going to be the new manager? And they settled on Alston. And everybody in Brooklyn said, who's he? The players knew. Right. The players knew. But the fans in Brooklyn, they didn't regard the minors as being anything other than minors. So up came Alston. They didn't know what to expect.
Who else was in the running?
Well, there was talk. Again, O'Malley himself and Buzzy Bavazzi never made it known whom they were considering. But there was talk of some former players. There was some talk of Pee Wee becoming a player manager. So there were various people, but Alston had such a solid record everywhere he'd gone for Rickey and then for O'Malley. When you trace it from Newark, New Jersey to Nashua, New Hampshire, Pueblo, Colorado, St. Paul, Montreal, a winner every year. And all the players on the team, except for Pee Wee and Jack Robinson, all the players knew him and they respected him. So the only thing remaining was to convince the fans, and there was only one way to do that: win.
To win, yeah. And they did that 2 years after he was hired. Of course, we're talking Alan Levy, the author of Walter Alston, The Rise of a Manager from the Minors to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So let's go to my least favorite Brooklyn Dodgers team of all time. Would you be able to describe the 55 Dodgers?
55 Dodgers they're often ranked as when you see these ratings on various sports programs, top 20 baseball teams of all time. 55 Dodgers are certainly among them.
No argument here.
Whether they're quite as good as, say, the 27 Yankees that are sort of the...
No, not as good as the 27 Yankees, but they're in the top 20. There's no question.
Yeah, there's no question. And many would argue the 27 Yankees deserve number one. It's like anything, it's good fun to debate it.
But I would say the 27 Yankees won.
Yeah, most would. But Alston himself said that he had an all-star at every position. I mean, look at the starting lineup. Campanella at catcher, Hodges at first base, Robinson usually played second, Pee Wee played short, outfielders Carl Furillo and Duke Snyder. I mean, it was pitchers Erskine, Magley. It was unbelievable. Padres, it was just, and Don Newcomb. It was incredible. And it was a team that got off to an incredible start. They won 23 of their first 24 games, and they just took off for the lead. They were never had a major losing streak. And each of the players had a terrific year as far as the batting average, RBIs. It was just a dream team. And so they won the pennant going away. And who's waiting for them in the World Series? Once again, those blankety-blank Yankees. And the Yankees won. They won the first 2 games in New York, and all the Yankee fans were chortling, saying, here we go again, time to burst Brooklyn's bubble once again. But then the Dodgers came back and won the next 3 games in Ebbets Field. That put them up 3-2. Whitey Ford came back in the next game and pitched a great outing and won Game 6. That made it 3-3. 7th game, Yankee Stadium. Padres started for the Dodgers, and there was a famous play late in the game in the 7th inning. Yankees were down 2-0. They had two on, none out. Yogi was up, and you can check it out on YouTube. It's all available by computer. Yogi sliced one down the left field line, and Sandy Almiros, great outfielder, very fast. He ran it down, caught it, flipped the relay throw to Pee Wee Reese, who threw it back to first to double off Gil McDougall. So instead of the Yankees having Yogi on second and 2 runs in with none out, they had Billy Martin back on second base and 2 out, and Hank Bauer was the next batter and grounded out, and so that was the end of the possible rally. Padres held them from there. Brooklyn had their one World Series and all of Brooklyn went nuts.
Can I tell you a funny New York Yankees, Brooklyn Dodgers story?
Sure.
Okay, so my great-grandfather, born in Brooklyn, Yankees fan. My grandfather, born in Brooklyn, Yankees fan. My father, born in Brooklyn, Yankees fan. One day, my father asked his father, my grandfather, Dad, you were born and raised in Brooklyn. You spent your whole life in Brooklyn, and your entire life you were a Yankees fan. How did you and Rudy Giuliani get out alive?
Good question.
Never got an answer.
My own father, born in Manhattan, Brooklyn fan.
Okay.
And he was in the days of the three teams. He was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. Go figure.
Yeah. Hey, look, different strokes, right?
My father was always attracted to the underdog kind of fandom.
I respect it. So, in addition to the Dodgers winning the 55 World Series, that year is notable for being the first year of Sandy Koufax's career. However, Koufax didn't really hit his stride until 1961.
Right.
Why didn't Alston fully unleash Koufax earlier?
The issue, several things. While in Brooklyn, it was a matter of he was a bonus baby, and under the rules of players getting paid an extra amount to sign on, in order to try to curb the free use of spending like that, a requirement was placed that you had to keep him on the big club. You couldn't sign a bonus baby and send him down to the minors.
Right.
So you had to keep Koufax with Brooklyn. And it's tough to let somebody who's got control problems and simply needs to mature, it's tough to let him do that in the majors. There's too many great hitters that'll take you apart and you can lose your confidence. So Alston felt it was wise to bring Koufax along slowly, and he did, by any standard, have control problems. Because at that point he still believed, until he learned otherwise, that he had to go all out on every pitch. He had blazing speed, there's no question about it. The saying at the time was he could throw a peanut through a dugout wall. The question was, could he hit the dugout?
Right.
And so the other problem was for Koufax, when the team moved to Los Angeles, this doesn't get as much publicity, but it was part of the story. When the team moved to Los Angeles, for the first couple of years, they played in the not terribly baseball adaptable L.A. Coliseum. And for left-handed pitchers especially, it was tough because the left field line was very short. Normal pop-ups in any ballpark became dangerously possible home runs. And so for left-handed pitchers against a right-handed batter, that short fence in left field spelled danger. And so Koufax, like many pitchers, had to alter his style in relationship to those short dimensions. Once the team moved into Dodger Stadium, more normal dimensions, then combined with the fact that he discovered he didn't have to go all out, then he hit his stride and was virtually unhittable for 5-6 years.
Speaking of Dodger Stadium and the L.A. Coliseum, how did Alston feel about the Dodgers moving?
He really wasn't as wedded to Brooklyn. I mean, Alston was a small-town Ohio boy, so he didn't like living in the city. He didn't like getting on the subway. When he was anywhere in town, he always instinctively said hello to people when he passed them by. You didn't do that in the big city. So he was never...
in New York, they'd clock you.
Yeah, exactly. So Alston he loved the team, but he was not tied to the town the way that so many of the players were. And, of course, he had the ties that the fans in Brooklyn did. So the move to L.A. was pretty much a matter of, well, if that's where Mr. O'Malley wants to take the team, then that's what I'm going to do. And so he just went off with the team and never looked back.
Okay. All right. Of course, we're talking to Alan Levy, the author of Walter Alston, The Rise of a Manager from the Minors to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So what was Alston's relationship like with O'Malley? Because there's a rumor that they really didn't get along. Was that true?
I found no evidence of that. It was pretty clear to me. I mean, O'Malley obviously was a man who had to be addressed with politeness and respect, and he demanded it, he commanded it, and Alston had absolutely no problem with the idea of speaking to him in that tone. It was natural for him to do that. So he wasn't being in any way disingenuous or anything else. He just treated the man with respect. There was never a point when they didn't get along. O'Malley may have been disappointed when they, for example, tied the Giants in 1962 and lost the playoffs, but he never came close to firing him. And within that, it's simply more a dynamic, not just of O'Malley and Alston, but it's O'Malley, Bavazzi, and Alston. It's the three of them working together all the time.
Right. And eventually, if you work alongside someone for a long period of time, eventually you're going to get ticked off with them in one way or another.
Sure.
Maybe not enough to blow up the relationship, but there are going to be things that they do that annoy the living SH out of you.
Sure. And all three of them readily understood that. And so if anything ever came up, they simply took it in the normal course of things and continued on. Each component of that triangle did what was expected of them. O'Malley as owner, and Bavazzi as the general manager and handled all the trades, and Alston, of course, handled everything in the ball field.
So what can you tell us about the 1959 Dodgers?
Alston said that was, in effect, he recognized it's not compared to what we were talking about with 55 Dodgers or the 27 Yankees. The 59 Dodgers won the World Series, but they were definitely not one of the great teams of all time. They were a good team. They were a solid team. But they were not a truly great team. But they, as Alston said, they were a manager's dream because every player came to the ballpark every day, gave 100%, no dissension. They all got along. So it was up to that point in baseball history since 1900 with the creation of the AL and NL Major League Baseball configuration. They won the World Series having won in the regular season only 87 games, the lowest total to that point ever. So they were beatable, but at the same time they maximized who they were. And Alston said that's what you want out of athletes. So they were a team that no personality issues, no conflicts, no immaturity, just straight hard driving baseball. And so he had to do nothing to motivate them, and they just kept plugging no matter what happened. And it worked.
Yeah, it did. Hey, look, they got a ring. I don't care if they were one of the great teams of all time or one of the worst teams of all time. If you get that ring, that's all that matters at the end of the day. And
they had the then very young stars like Jim Gilliam, Maury Wills, a few of the old-timers like Duke Snider was still there. It was a shame, of course, that Roy Campanella had gotten injured in an auto accident before the '58 season, so he was alive to watch it, but he could no longer play. He was permanently in a wheelchair. But and he was an inspiration in that context as well, which was part of the maturity issue, I'm convinced. He was truly valuable as an occasional visitor and member of the organization.
No question.
But Roseboro, Drysdale was pitching by that point. There was just really, really solid players playing well. And even at that point, Koufax did pitch one critical game in September against the Giants when he struck out 18. It was his first great outing.
You took the next question right out of my mouth. Can you lay out Alston's relationship with Drysdale?
Oh, there's some good stories to tell. First off, Drysdale himself thought Alston was a terrific manager. Drysdale made the statement, if you can't play for Walter Alston, you can't play for anybody. I mean,
right.
He respected Alston immensely. He knew he was a good man to play for. Drysdale, like any good athlete, or like most, Drysdale had an ego. Drysdale had a temper, and but that was never a problem. Alston let him spout when he needed to. The famous story that actually wasn't true, but supposedly, the 1965 World Series, Game 1, that was the game in Minneapolis against the Twins, where that fell on the same day as the Jewish holiday Yom Kippur. Koufax wouldn't pitch Game 1. He spent the day at an Orthodox synagogue. O'Malley and Alston did nothing but sing praise for him in terms of his religious devotion. He wouldn't pitch, so Drysdale pitched Game 1. The Twins that year had a very strong lineup, and they got to Drysdale in the third inning. They shellacked him pretty hard, and Alston had to trudge out the mound to take him out. And the rumor always was that Alston, as he was walking out there, was muttering to himself, God, I wish Drysdale was Jewish. It wasn't true, but it's a good story.
Oh, man. I'm disappointed that isn't true. That should have been true. It's a great line.
It's like the old, remember in the movie, the movie with John Wayne on the man who shot Liberty Valance, and the conclusion of the reporter, this is the West. When there's a difference between the legend and the facts, print the legend.
Right. Talking to Alan Levy, the author of Walter Alston, The Rise of a Manager from the Minors to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So would you be able to describe the 1963 Dodgers?
Sure. That was a powerhouse. Just like 55, that's another team that makes it high in the rankings of top teams of all time. Not because they had a great offensive lineup. They had some good players. Tommy Davis certainly was an outstanding player. If he hadn't gotten hurt in 1965, up to that point, he was ranked up there with Frank Robinson, Willie Mays, Roberto Clemente, and Hank Aaron as far as great players of the day, or outfielders and hitters. But aside from that, they didn't have major offensive threats other than just good speed with people like Wills and Gilliam. But, of course, what they had was Koufax, Drysdale, and Johnny Padres all pitching at their absolute peak, particularly Koufax, who went 25-5 that year. They won the pennant easily, and the first game of the World Series was the game Koufax started and beat the Yankees, and he struck out 15. Yogi Berra watched the game, and after the game was over, a reporter asked him, "What do you think of Koufax?" He went 25-5 this year, and Yogi said, "Yeah, I can see how he won 25. How in the world did he lose 5?"
Oh man, I love those Yogi-isms, right?
Yeah, and of course that was the only Yankee team in the glory days. That was the only Yankee team that ever was swept in a World Series. Right.
They always at least won one, but 63, the Yankees were no match for the Dodgers. You're 100% right.
There was a famous story in Game 4 also when Koufax returned after winning the first game. The Yankees had him in a tough position in the seventh game, 2 on, 1 out. Up came Mantle and Tresh, and with Mantle in there, Koufax reared back and threw a couple of fastballs, and got Mantle down 0-2. Next pitch, he whipped the curveball past him. Mickey swung at it, and he turned to Roseboro as he was walking away and said, "How the blank do you hit that blank?" You know what the words were. And Roseboro just laughed.
The guy was unhittable.
Yeah, he was.
Koufax was absolutely unhittable. It's one of the biggest what-ifs in sports history. How great could Sandy Koufax have been long-term if he never got arthritis?
Yeah. But, of course, the arthritis was, in effect, post-traumatic because of all the danger, all the damage he did to his elbow in all those years of overstriding and overdoing it as far as trying to hit the top speed on every pitch. He learned to pace himself a little too late. He was, I think, the only thing that's good about Koufax in that context is that we did at least see him at his best, not for as long as we would have liked, but for those years. That was, in my mind, at least the best I ever saw with my own eyes.
And at least now we can use Koufax as a cautionary tale of, hey, insert young pitcher here, you don't need to go all out on every pitch. Save your bullets, stagger them. Look at what happened to Koufax.
Yeah, and beyond that, do what they do now with pitchers. Unless you're pitching a perfect game or something, if you pitched 100 pitches during the game, out you go.
Yeah. Oh, God, that drives me nuts. That drives me absolutely nuts.
Back then, you're expected to finish the game by all odds, unless you were really in trouble.
There's got to be a happy medium between pitching a complete game every start and getting pulled in the 5th inning every start.
Yeah, but better. You got to admit, from a medical standpoint, it's better to err on the side of taking them out a little too soon than it is to leave them in too long.
From a medical standpoint, it's better, but from a pure baseball standpoint, I think it's worse.
Yeah, it's true. The game has changed. I can tell you a story that's from a different time, but it reveals the point. If you look at the data on Christy Matthewson, one of the greats of all time without doubt, he won 373 games. He lasted almost 20 years. He averaged giving up 9 hits per game. The reason being because when he went out to the mound and he knew he was pitching to batters 6, 7, 8, and 9 that inning, he coasted.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
No.
Batters 6, 7, and 8 are usually pretty good hitters, and you have to keep bearing down. Matthewson, Grover Alexander, Walter Johnson, those guys had to learn to pace themselves because unless they were getting absolutely shellacked, and even then many times, they're still going to go the full 9. So you better pace yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Talking to Alan Levy, the author of Walter Alston, The Rise of a Manager from the Minors to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So we spoke about the famous moment of the 1965 World Series, Game 1, Koufax not starting to observe Yom Kippur at his temple. What can you tell us about the team as a whole?
That 65 team really, the best way you can describe them, they were a team who kept fighting because the big thing that happened in May of 65 was that their star outfielder and offensive threat, Tommy Davis, broke his ankle going for the season. So they didn't have that much punch in their lineup. Yet they struggled. They kept on fighting. Koufax kept pitching. Drysdale kept pitching. Their defense was good, and they won the pennant. So they just simply would not let themselves get down. Alston was part of that fueling because Alston, there's an old adage in most any sport, never get too low, never get too high either. Keep it on an even keel. Keep the intensity there, but don't get too much on a high note because then you'll fall to some degree as well. The Yankee teams under Billy Martin suffered in that way over many years, which is why part of the reason Steinbrenner, who had highs and lows of his own, of course, but that was not a very good relationship. Whereas Alston, much more steady, and he was very good at keeping a team on an even keel like that. And so the 65 team made it, because of extraordinary pitching and defense, and again on management and a collective mentality that was mature, was not going to get down on themselves, not going to do anything other than just keep plugging every day. And they got to the World Series, and very good Twins team, there's no question, very potent lineup. And after losing the first 2 games, the Dodgers came back and won. And the most dramatic point about it, of course, was that after not being there for Yom Kippur, Koufax started and lost Game 3, but then he won Game 5 and came back and won Game 7 on 2 days rest.
Yeah, against Jim Cott. Fantastic Game 7. And also the 65 Dodgers got there because they were able to replace Tommy Davis, great player, but they were able to replace him with a pretty good player in Sweet Lou Johnson.
No question. And also, very much a very good player and also a very solid, mature team player personality. I mean, he was just a very, very decent guy. They called him Sweet Lou, and I mean, that wasn't meant in any way negatively. He was just an altogether positive, good player and very good guy in the locker room to have around, keep morale up. He was just a very good human being, very decent fellow.
You mean Lou Piniella didn't originate Sweet Lou? It was Sweet Lou Johnson? Oh, man. So, Alan, I'll get you out on this. Lou Johnson died in October. There are 2 other Dodgers legends that died recently. Got to ask you a question about them. What can you tell us about the bond that Alston had with Tommy Lasorda and Don Sutton?
Well, with Lasorda particularly, it was a very strong bond because Lasorda was, again, a pitcher in the Dodger organization that Alston had worked with while he was coming up. He was actually, that's a good trivia question. I've already given you the answer, in effect. But when Koufax had to stay because of the bonus baby rule, what pitcher did Alston have to consign back to Montreal? The answer was Lasorda.
Yeah.
But Alston, in effect, saw in Lasorda the same thing that Rickey saw in Alston, in that he saw talent, Alston did, and he used Lasorda effectively at times as a pitcher. But he saw in Lasorda particularly the management skills, the skills with personnel and the intelligence, the ability to think about strategy and make calls, and he groomed him in this way. And after his playing days were done, he kept him on as a coach, and then, of course, when Alston decided to step down in in '76. He highly recommended and was stepped aside for Lasorda, who kept it going.
What about Sutton?
And Sutton, very simply put, it was a good relationship in terms of personalities, and Alston saw the pitching talent that was there and helped him develop and was able to turn him over to Lasorda for further work in the mid-'70s. Very effective and very, very strong pitcher.
All right, Alan. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right. That was Alan Levy. His book is Walter Alston, The Rise of a Manager from the Minors to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. In answer to what you may be thinking right now, no, I didn't forget to talk about the NBA All-Star Game. I literally couldn't care any less about it. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to watch the slam dunk contest, the three-point contest. The fact that it's at halftime of the All-Star Game this year makes me not want to watch those events that I usually like. I'll probably catch the highlights on YouTube or Twitter. I'm not going to watch a second of the game. Couldn't care any less about it. They shouldn't be having it in the first place. Couldn't care any less about the draft. Yeah, Gobert and Mitchell going last is really unfair, and you've got LeBron making the comment about how when they were younger, they never played with the Jazz in video games. Yeah, the Jazz aren't a cool team. They're not a sexy team. We know that. It's unfair, but when you play in Utah, them's the breaks. I will say this, though. Blake Griffin officially got bought out by the Pistons today. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Does Griffin take his time to find the right fit, or does he sign with a contender right away? I'll say this. I don't want the Nets to jump all over him. There are better players that could become available, like Andre Drummond. Drummond fits the Nets better than Blake Griffin. Let me go over the schedule for this show before I let you go. Next week, business as usual. New York Islanders show Monday night. Regular episodes of the Jacob Valk show every weekday afternoon. March 15th, just a Brooklyn Nets show. March 16th, no show. March 17th, First Four preview. March 18th, no show. March 19th, Round of 64 preview. March 20th, no show. March 21st, Round of 32 preview. March 22nd, no show. March 23rd, NFL free agency recap. March 24th, business as usual. March 25th, NBA trade deadline show. March 29th, New York Islanders show in the evening, preceded by a regular episode of the Jacob Valk show. March 31st, New York Yankees season preview to be posted in the evening, preceded by a regular episode of the Jacob Valk show. April 1st, big MLB preview. April 5th, Brooklyn Nets show in the evening to be preceded by a regular episode of the Jacob Valk show. April 12th, NHL trade deadline show to be followed by a New York Islanders trade deadline grade show. April 19th, New York Yankees show to be posted in the evening, preceded by a regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show. And April 29th, a New York Jets draft preview, to be followed by a regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show. Make sure that you follow me on Twitter at RealJacobValk so you know the second that new episodes are posted. Subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, CastBox, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Geo7, YouTube, even on your Amazon Echo. Check back there constantly. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that Trevor Bauer should throw a Visine ball. After all, it gets the red out.